Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our continuing coverage of the Texas UFO Conference, first annual here in Jefferson, Texas. We are joined right now by Mitchel Whitington. He is the author of Close Encounters of the Texas Kind, as well as Funeral and Mourning Traditions of the Old South, which I definitely want to have you on to talk about. I did a whole episode with somebody about funerary traditions in America and how they've changed and how that's changed our whole society, actually. But what has changed our whole society over the last 5 years has really been the opening of the conversation with UFOs, UAPs. Let's get into real quick, Mitchell. How is it that you first came into this topic, and what brought you to writing the book?
The inspiration for writing the book was actually seeing something one night. I don't really know what I thought about them beforehand. You know, it's one of those things that, okay, maybe not. I don't know. I don't know that it affects my life one way or the other. But I had gone out on our back porch one evening because we're supposed to have a huge storm, and it missed us. It was to the west. So I'm just standing out there watching the thunder and the lightning over in the western sky, and it was a huge clap of thunder, bright flash of lightning, and I looked up, and up in the sky was a round, huge object. And my first thought in that second that I saw it was, what the heck is that? And my second one was, that's manufactured. That's not something that's natural. So I called for my wife. She came out and I said, hang on, wait till the next flash. And sure enough, it was gone. It wasn't floating away. It was just gone. And there were no windows. There were no fins, there were no wings, nothing. I don't know what propelled it, but it was enough for me to go, okay, I just saw something that I don't understand. So
yeah,
that sent me down that whole path of wanting to look at our history in Texas and how far back they go in some of the cases that are really early on. So that's what started the whole thing.
Well, and, it's interesting because we do have, especially here in the last few years, Texas has truly become a hot spot. It has. With MUFON and MUFON reporting and sightings. But the history of airships, things like that in Texas goes way back in history. Let's get into a few of those cases that you came across.
Probably one of my favorite happened in Aurora, Texas in 1897. And the interesting thing about that to me is people are fighting over it still. It's been proven, then disproven, and then proven, and then disproven again. So every time somebody will prove something new with the case, and somebody else will come along and find reasons to doubt it. So it's still this ongoing discussion about it, and that's over 120 years ago. Yeah. They've had a really interesting run with it down there. Aurora never embraced it like, say, Roswell did. You know, you go to Roswell, and it's UFO City. Yeah. And so I wonder if they didn't miss the boat on that or what. But it's not really a huge topic down there. They have a smoking windmill barbecue that's actually pretty good, I might add, and they had a venue for a band and things like that. But other than that, they don't make a big deal out of it. But following back and looking through at all the things associated with it, to me, just something happened. And of course, now the big thing is everybody wants to dig up the alien. You know, he's in the cemetery. Yeah, but that was 120 years ago. Back then, and I did a lot of research on it. Back then, you got buried in basically a wooden box. You know, they didn't have hermetically sealed.
Yeah, it was a pine box, man.
So whatever's there is gone. You know, I have a friend of mine that is a professor at LSUS, and he's arguably probably one of the authorities on the Red River campaign of the Civil War. Oh, wow. And very knowledgeable. So he was invited to come to an exhumation of one of the generals from that particular campaign that's buried in a family cemetery in Natchitoches. And they wanted to dig him up and bury him in a military cemetery elsewhere in the state. So they invited him to be there for it. And that way, if they found any artifacts, he could identify. And he said when they got down to it, all they found were some nails from the coffin, a few buttons, metal buttons from his uniform. And other than that, he said the dirt was kind of discolored where the body had kind of soaked into it, if you will. Sure. And so they respectfully and carefully took the dirt out and put that in the new coffin buried it with all honors. But I think that's what they would find if they dug up in Aurora, is after all this time, there's not going to be anything there.
Yeah, and there's been ground penetrating radar out there at the cemetery, and they've definitely proven the fact that there was at some point something there. There is a depression in the ground. There was something that filled there, and now there is a void that has collapsed upon itself. That's all they can show.
Yes.
And it's been pretty interesting to see that. Daniel Allen Jones is actually in the other room giving a presentation on Aurora as we speak. I'm very, very much looking forward to his book coming out, because it's really, as opposed to giving a narration or a narrative of it, really giving a chronicle of the town and the accounts that came out of the town, the accounts throughout history, and really documenting everything that came from the case.
Yeah, he and I both have an interest in that case. So, earlier today we kind of snuck off in the corner and had this long conversation about it. I really enjoyed talking with him.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and it really is a remarkable case whenever you look at it.
And there's a lot of different aspects of it. Some people believe that the whole thing was a burial of Confederate gold. That there was an organization called the Knights of the Golden Circle. Right,
yeah. And oddly enough, right down the road from here in Marshall, Texas, is a relative of Jesse James.
Yes.
Who has written a book about Jesse James not dying, as he said, but carried on here in Texas and may have well buried some of the gold from the Knights of the Golden Circle right here in the Lonestar State. So that being a hypothesis, and it being not too incredibly far away. I mean, granted, by modern means, old means, it would probably be about a day and a half ride.
Sure.
Something like that. But still, for horseback, not too far off. And yeah, it's an interesting hypothesis to think about.
It is. And everybody has these different theories about it. And at the time, there were airships being seen all over the country, really.
Yeah.
And I forget the gentleman's name, and I hate that, but one guy actually wrote a book, and he plotted all the news stories from all these airships. And in his book, he comes out and he says that it is a continuous, like they were actually moving, if you had 5 ships doing it. And he said at that point, it makes perfect sense. Now, this is long before Wright brothers came out.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to imagine, but there's so many news stories of the day about the airships that who knows what's there to it. If something like that crashed in Aurora, it would fit right in with the news of the day.
Yeah, precisely. And now, going through other stories that you gathered from Texas, were there any commonalities that you found with Aurora?
The biggest commonality with Aurora, to me, is Roswell. Except it was 50 years before that.
Yeah.
But there's other stories that do have common points. There was a guy who was a Air Force pilot. He was actually in the reserve, and they were flying, and this was in 1955. They were flying a training mission, and he and 3 other pilots were in smaller jets, and they were escorting a large bomber. They were flying from Fort Worth to El Paso. And what they were simulating was what would happen if they decided to go bomb the Soviet Union. And in 1955.
That's actual reality.
That is something.
Actual reality again.
Yes, well, there you go.
Good thing we practiced.
Yes. But anyway, Colonel Willingham was his name. And so as they're flying in their formation and doing their drill, a white light comes at him. He said just a white light that was brilliant. And he said it was moving at about 2,000 miles an hour. And being a pilot, he couldn't judge such things, I guess. And to keep that in perspective, a jetliner today going from here to Vegas is going to fly 500 miles an hour or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that the fastest thing that we have, the fastest thing that they have told us about is 1,800, And so this was moving faster than anything he had seen. But interestingly enough, it took a 90-degree turn and turned down toward the Mexico-U.S. border. So he got permission to follow. And, of course, he couldn't keep up with it, but he just headed in that same direction. When he crossed the border in Del Rio, he saw that there was a crashed saucer just on the Mexican side in the sand. It had buried beside the Rio Grande River. So he turned around. He went back to the Air Force Base in Fort Worth, landed his plane, turned in his military jet because he was in the reserves. He went to a nearby airfield where he knew the folks, and he borrowed a single-engine little small plane and flew back down there. When he got there, the Mexican authorities were there. He landed on their side, and he said, just here to check things out, what happened? And they said, we're waiting for the U.S. military. And he said, oh, well, I'm U.S. military. And they're like, no, we're waiting on a specific group.
Yeah.
So you shut up, get out.
Yeah.
But as the story goes, he went over and there was a gash in the craft. He looked in and he described 3 individuals with large heads, little slits for mouth, and arms that he described like broomsticks. So this was long before anybody had seen the cover of Communion or Close Encounters or anything. Yeah. But anyway, they said, look, you got to get out of here. We're supposed to secure this place. So he did. He got in his plane and left. But on the way back, he saw, before he got to his plane, he saw a piece of debris, a metal debris. He picked it up and put it in his pocket. So as it turns out, his dad was a metallurgist. And so he had a lot of his dad's equipment he had inherited in his shop. So just to play with it, he tried to burn it. He tried to cut it. He said, couldn't touch it. So he went to a U.S. metallurgy lab in Maryland that he knew a guy that worked there, and he gave him the piece. He flew it there personally, and he said, could you test this and tell me what it is? Time went by, nothing happened. And finally he called, and the lab said, we don't have anybody by that name working here. He said, no, I know the guy. I just brought him a piece of material to look at. They said, we've never had anybody by that name working here, and we've never taken material in like you're talking about. And in fact, we're about to close the lab, so don't call back. So he started getting calls from the upper echelon in the military saying, you need to just back off. Whatever you think you saw, you didn't. You need to just stop. But as it turns out, a few weeks later, he got an envelope in the mail, no return address, no signature. It just said one thing. It said, you know, that material you brought us to test, we've never seen anything like it before or since. And he thinks it came from his friend, who was obviously not able to communicate directly. But the most interesting thing is his description of that white light going so fast and making the turns. If you think back a few years ago to where that leaked footage came from the cockpits of some of our fighter planes, they talk about how fast it's going and the fact that it would take a hard turn without losing speed. And, you know, the discussion that they were having was if there was a person in there, a human, the G-force alone would just tear their body apart. But that description almost exactly matches Willingham's description.
Yeah.
So you see these parallels and you start to think, wow, maybe, you know, there is some correlation there.
Yeah. And it's even earlier talking with Smiles, the idea of correlation between people's stories, especially multiple witness testimony to the same event. That is always kind of the holy grail of an investigator. So often you come across the fact that, like you're saying, there's a single witness to an event. And I am prone to believe a witness until proven otherwise.
Right.
That's just how I am. Some of the things that come out, especially stories like that, through deathbed confessions, are increasing in frequency, and the stories are getting wilder.
The other thing I found is that after the cockpit footage was leaked, you know, that has opened a door, not a huge amount, but a little bit. And pilots are a little bit more free now to come out and talk about things they've seen.
Well, they've actually come out with an FAA reporting system now.
Right.
There's an actual system now for pilots to go report without shame, without fear of losing a pilot's license, and
which has not been the case forever.
For years, if you said that you said something or you saw something from your cockpit that wasn't being told to you was 3 miles off to your right, just so you're aware of it from radar, you get ready for a drug test when you land, get ready to possibly have your license stripped from you and to lose your career as a pilot. And it was that way with military pilots. It was that way with commercial pilots. And we've finally come up with a protocol of reporting that opens the doorway for these literal trained observers to be able to give their report.
It does. And I guess the only thing disappointing about the progress to me is they didn't come back and say, oh, and by the way, here's what we have from Roswell. Here's what we have from Del Rio.
Yeah.
So there's still stuff that I think gets called into question that they haven't told us about yet.
Sure. And it's one of those, we definitely have programs in the country. I mean, even the congressional hearings that all the UAP videos brought about was a huge point. And I think mainly because, as we said earlier, it's the fact of the people who were in charge of giving that money to contractors were like, well, we didn't hear about this program. What do you mean, ATIP?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Because it was a department within a department, compartmentalized within a department, and typically within the realm of government contracting, that's the way that works, and it's obfuscated that way, of course, to protect national security secrets, programs like Have Blue, that kind of stuff. But just in the last year, the technology that has been released. I mean, all of a few weeks ago, we added to our knowledge vault the declassified and now public documentation from Lockheed Martin about a nuclear reactor that'll fit inside of an F-16. So the technology for us to make Alcubierre warp drives and make these things, or you'd have to have the power of a sun or a star to make it happen. It's like,
yeah, maybe
we can kind of make it happen. We can miniaturize that technology. We can make that happen now.
And they are still very secretive about it, but I think a little bit more is starting to come out.
Yeah.
There's a book called Skunk Works, and it's about the development of the stealth bomber. And the team that was working on it, they had coffee cups made up, and it had a cloud with the nose of the stealth bomber coming out of it. Well, because it showed some of the way that thing is paneled to, not pick up radar and everything, they said, well, you can't use these. You can't have these out. So they made them keep them in a locked cabinet. And once a day, they could go take theirs out, and everybody would drink coffee out of their special mugs and put them back in.
Put them back in.
Yeah, that's the kind of control that they had over the years exercised on anything they thought was secret like that.
Well, and that's just it. We have a great realm of technology that is out there that a lot of the times we don't really hear about the technology like Stealth Fighter until it's released.
Right.
And as we said on the program a few times recently, do you think that after they won the contract for do you think they would have won the contract for Have Blue if they didn't have a way to detect it? Yeah. Like, here's your contract money. Oh, wait, did you come up with a way to detect this thing? So yeah, there's an answer to the technology already when it comes out, and the thing is, it's so compartmentalized and so secret that you'll never hear about like, you're lucky you heard about the program, much less the solution.
Yeah.
A prime example right now would be X-37B, just landed after 900 plus days in orbit.
Right.
To literal sonic booms over Florida that people didn't know what was going on. That broke its previous record of 700 days. The first time we heard about it was after it landed after a 2-year successful mission. So Space Force, nothing new. We've been working on that for the longest time. The X-37 landed like 5 years before the announcement of the Space Force.
Yeah, I think all Space Force is giving an official logo to something that's been going on forever.
Yeah, precisely. And it really does show the longevity of thought and of the thought form with the military of we'll let them know when it's time.
Yeah.
And I think that's right up what we're against right now, especially with the announcements coming out of China with hypersonic technology, the little usage of hypersonic technology now in the theater of war. It's pretty hard for anybody to dismiss or to say like, oh, hypersonic technology is a decade away.
Yep.
Nobody's close to that right now. It's a little bit hard to say that when we are literally facing down the weaponry using that technology.
Sure.
And the real question comes to bear, do you have a means by which to intercept that? Because if you can't intercept that, It's going to be real hard to intercept the other.
You know, it reminds me of the old days of when you had radar detectors in your car.
Yeah.
And the old joke was that it was really one company with two halves, and one would put out the new radar detector, and then the other would put out the new radar.
Yeah.
And then another would come back to beat that. And they were back and forth. So they constantly had a base of selling things. So
Absolutely.
you have to wonder, is that going on in the military? Well, who knows?
Yeah, kind of. It literally is. And they have contractors working on solutions to the problems that these dudes are solving right now.
Right.
You know? So these are the ways that they're looking at solving the situation. How are you going to counteract that?
Exactly.
How would we counter that technology if they were using it? You know, so it's really interesting, and to see how the government and the alphabet agencies themselves play things out amongst each other. I mean, it took 9/11, and even 9/11 didn't make it to where every department talks with every department.
Right, and that they continually is more and more documentation comes out about that day. As terrible as it was, the biggest downfall was there wasn't a protocol for everybody talking.
Yeah. I mean, even with the pandemic response that happened over the last couple of years, I've got nothing political here. I wasn't a huge fan of the president. However, despite who he fired, those people who were in charge still had no plan.
Yeah.
Just saying, just putting it out there. There would have been a book left. So sorry you're fired. So you left your book, right? Yeah. Cool. So this is the plan. That book did not exist,
right?
Despite swine flu, everything else, because the departments did not talk to each other.
Yep.
They didn't get together and problem solve together, which is an endemic problem.
It makes me wonder, though, the Del Rio crash that we talked about, are those people talking to the people that have the Roswell stuff? Or are they talking to,
Precisely. And the contractors who got that, are they the same contractors that got that? Or were there competing contractors by that point? And, one went to Boeing, one went to Lockheed, and, all that kind of stuff. It's really interesting once you start digging into the history of U.S. contracting in the military, and truly the warning of the military-industrial complex that we were given so many years ago as Eisenhower left.
And if it all came down to contractors, then it goes a step beyond that, and it all comes down to money.
Yep.
If you have your company and I have my company, and we're both wanting to go work on the Roswell stuff, not only am I going to be bidding for it, I'm going to be trashing you, and you don't want to go to, so it gets into a whole thing that kind of floats away from national security and good for the nation and all like that.
Well, even though, and once again, just to go back to the congressional panel that happened, there seemed to be a lot, and don't get me wrong, national defense, absolutely. But that seemed to be an underlying topic of conversation and an underlying point, like, we need to scientifically study this. We need to, no, it was lock it down. Let's have the conversation. Well, if you want to know about that, we'll talk about that in our closed door session after this. Because we're obviously going to talk to you about more funding to take care of this. There seemed to be a whole air around it of, we need more funding. We need more funding to figure out the threat.
Yep.
The words threat were used numerous times during that. You really have to consider even the unintentional use of that word and what the framework it lays in mind for people.
It does. And, when you're looking at senators sitting there asking questions of military guys, how would we deal with this? But when you distill that down to the very pilots who are witness to it, they're like, we have no idea.
We can't deal with that.
There is no dealing.
Like, I know the capabilities of my plane, and there ain't no dealing with that.
Yeah. I think back to that movie, Independence Day.
Yeah.
Will Smith looks at one of those things. He goes, "I gotta get me one of those."
Yeah, precisely.
Because they're seeing things that aren't possible in our world. So I mean, it's just by luck or fate or whatever that whoever has those hadn't attacked.
Yeah, well, and they know their technology that they use and have at hand. They know that in order to make a 2-3G turn, like their pressure suit is going to build up and push the blood to their brain. what would happen with that turn?
Yeah.
My turn's like this.
Yeah, exactly.
That turn wasn't like that. So even knowing offhand the technology that it takes for you to be sitting where you're sitting, and then imagining what it would take to be sitting in that and making that happen.
Right.
They have a definite grasp of that. So yeah, once again, not just trained observers, but experiential observers when it comes to things like that. They know what capability it takes to make that happen.
Yeah.
And it's been pretty interesting to see the conversations coming out from Navy pilots, from private pilots. Once again, the conversation has really, really been open to them, and it's fantastic.
It is, and I think it's got to be even more so moving forward. And I think the public, you know, they've always said, well, if we actually come out and say that there's aliens, the public will, society will, you know, spin into a complete, you know.
It could. It could, you know, that is one of the whole reasons that NASA brought aboard the 12 theologians and put that money into a grant package for them to, because when you're talking about something like this, you know, it's a belief changer. It doesn't matter what you hold true spiritually. When you have an experience like that, it changes you. And it changes the way you view what you believe. And sometimes it can rock your world so much that what you believe no longer exists. And what will happen to the religious paradigm of society? What will happen to that 20% that follows this path because of their faith? And when what's in that book that is the source of their faith comes to full question, and this is posed before them, what will be the result? You know, because it doesn't take the overwhelming majority to make a difference. I use the concept of 80-20 on this show regularly because, well, less than 20% of the American public fought in the American Revolution. The rest of them went, "You're a crazy person. Stop. Please, good God, stop what you're doing." So it doesn't take the overwhelming majority. It actually takes the underwhelming minority to truly change things. So it's not going to take 80% of the populace to panic to cause a downfall. It'll take like 8-9%. And when those panic, I mean, a prime example, go out, enjoy any parking lot full of birds, then take 2 steps closer. And when one bird freaks out and flies 20 feet off, they all follow suit. They all follow. There may be a few stragglers. The crows may stay, but the grackles are going to go. You know, and we really do have to think of that birds of a feather mentality, that when it comes to the following nature of humanity, we are perfectly rational beings, but when it comes down to it, we are an animal by nature. Oh, absolutely. And we are a no less than a herd of cattle. We are a panicky animal.
I think if it ever came completely out and they said, yes, we have been visited for all these years, that is going to rock people spiritually as well as emotionally and everything else. And I had recently done a lot of research on near-death experiences. And there's a corollary there because they say that when somebody has a near-death experience, you actually see the other side. You're actually there. And when you come back, your world is different. And one of the things they completely abandon, first of all, is any organized religion.
Yeah.
They say, no, y'all are just doing stuff. You know, the essence of it is much different than that.
Yeah.
And that's what we would be looking at if they said, oh, there's aliens. Oh.
Well, and one of the things that we've really rabbit-holed on this show over the last 6 months or so is the other side of experience, you know, because everybody's like, oh, I'd love to have this experience. Really? Because I've talked to a lot of experiencer. I've talked to a lot of people in these books who've written the books and who had the experiences. A lot of them ain't pleasant.
Yeah.
A lot of the aftermath, feel free to go talk to Travis Walton sometime. See how that experience, like, you may think like, oh, he had a movie made, he's living the lap of luxury. No, he's not. As a matter of fact, like, he and his buddy Mike no longer talk. His buddy Mike, you remember that his buddy Mike was like a suspect in murder?
Yeah.
He was a murder suspect. He lost his state licenses for logging. He lost government contracts for logging. Like, his career was ruined because of this experience, because he came forward with the experience, and was willing to court the experience. So you really have to be aware of that and be wary of that.
But, that's the kind of thing that people weigh when they're thinking about, should I say that I saw this thing? Should I say,
Because it's a life changer.
Yep.
Period. It's a life changer. Whether it changed the way that you think about the world or whether it changes the way the world interacts with you.
Right.
It's a life changer. And yeah, it's a big nut to crack, man. It's gonna be interesting over the next literal decade, to see how this shakes out, because it's literally less than 5 years old.
Yeah, and I think 10 years from now it'll be completely different from what we think today.
Yeah,
and that will be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we let you go, Mitch, let everybody know where they can go to get your books, Close Encounters of the Texas Kind, Funeral Mournings and Traditions of the Old South, and your whole table of books over there. You got a whole bunch of them. So
yeah, for the Close Encounters book, just go to TexasUFO.com.
Okay.
And, of course, it's on Amazon, and it's for sale in a bunch of stores and things like that. But if you want a signed copy, just go to TexasUFO.com, and I'll be happy to take care of that for you.
Well, fantastic.
But I appreciate you having me on. Appreciate the time. I really enjoyed talking to you.
I'd love to have you on again. Appreciate your time today during this first annual Texas UFOCon.
We're looking forward to the second one.
Absolutely. Same here. While you are online checking out all the amazing work from Mitchel Whitington, make sure to stop on by Curious Realm. CuriousRealm.com is the website. That's where you can like, subscribe, follow us on social media. That's where you can access the knowledge vault full of declassified government documents and other fun stuff. And, of course, while you're online, make sure to check out the upcoming dates for Texas UFOCon 2023. We will be right back with additional coverage of this fantastic event right after these messages.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Curious Realm. Stay tuned for more guests, forbidden topics, and hidden truths. Download the official Curious Realm app and view the Knowledge Vault on our website, CuriousRealm.com. Follow us on social media by searching Curious Realm. Curious Realm is available on your favorite podcast services, as well as YouTube, Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV through the APR TV app, available on all app markets. Curious Realm is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. For more great content or to become a sponsor of Curious Realm or other podcasts, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Thanks for listening. Stay curious. And remember, the other side is always watching.